Hello, Keith. It's Sunday. So what do we? So introductions: Aaron McLaughlin in Christchurch,
Keith Gilbert in Sydney, Australia,
and talking about NLP and whatever kind of crops up regarding NLP.
Yes, NLP from the very small to the very big.
The micro to the macro.
That's right.
So with that in mind, we're just making it clear that this is a first. Well, it's the second, but the first didn't work. The second didn't work. Well, it did, but it didn't work technically. So we're starting again, which is nice. And so there might be a bit of fiddling with things, but it doesn't matter. It's all about, in this instance, the content. So, what are we talking about?
For our viewers, we're a couple of guys who are fascinated with NLP, and what we want to do is have discussions about it in what we hope to be very user-friendly ways.
Can only hope.
Yeah, we will make them user-friendly. So we're going to discuss NLP. We're also going to demonstrate on each other. So you're going to watch these two people become superhumans right in front of your very eyes.
Okay, no pressure. Just out of curiosity, Keith, how would you define superhuman?
Better than what I did yesterday.
So it's about superhuman is not actually a thing, it's more of a doing.
Oh, it's a process.
This process is an emergent process.
It's emergent, which is different to stagnation. Staying where one is.
Yeah, which in itself is very interesting. Like a fridge, homeostatic. As opposed to human, which is allostatic or allostatic. Can't remember. Yeah.
But a fridge has to know when it's gone too far. So we can go back.
Say that again?
A fridge has to know when it's gone too far.
Well, that's why it's homeostatic. So it's almost homing in on the 4 degrees, whereas a human is allostatic, which is constantly finding balance as it emerges forward, constantly. Yeah.
Well, we're continuously falling forwards and catching ourselves with our feet.
Oh, Laurie Anderson, my favourite, Laurie Anderson, falling forward and catching ourselves. Love it.
What? To walk, you have to be imbalanced.
Yeah.
To move, you have to be imbalanced.
But you have to also trust that you'll be out of balance for a little while, like momentarily.
What is trust?
Well, this is interesting because what came up this week with a couple of clients, specifically one that I have been working with for quite a while. So what I'm about to do is explain kind of a situation from my work, which is what I call coaching, not therapy. So it's from a coaching perspective, and what came up was this thing called internal representations. And after a number of sessions of trying to, well, it's interesting because there's this thing around NLP where we don't want to bring our story or our, we almost want to be like a child who's learning a language with a client. So we're kind of wanting to be a clean slate, learning how they run their brain. And yet as a human being with all of our own challenges at best. We can't, well, I will speak for myself. I have this propensity occasionally to just, oh my God, why don't you understand what's going on? Oh my God, can't you see your own patterns? You know. And I'll own that, you know, because it's totally inappropriate. I mean, I don't say that, but it's like, you're running patterns, and having done this for 22 years, I can see that there's a pattern, and the pattern might be emerging in language, it might be emerging in the way that they're accessing their brain, it might be they're non-verbal, like sitting there going, you know, like this, twitching away, or their legs jiggling, you know, like a dog scratching a flea. And it's like, you know, it's like this constant sort of non-verbal pattern thing that only emerges when this certain conversation occurs. And that really is, well, in this case, was about internal representations. What's your take, Keith, on internal representations? No pressure, buddy.
Let's take a step back. We'll come back to this. Take a step back. Let's define NLP for our viewers.
Oh, okay.
And that'll take us straight into internal representations anyway.
Yeah, good call.
And it's funny. I've often struggled with defining NLP, and I think let's think about it this way, because you can probably think about it many ways.
Yep.
If I'm standing and there's a chair over there, and I want to sit in the chair.
Yeah.
For me to go from standing to sitting requires, it's a goal in the first place. So that's a goal, it has a direction, it has a purpose. How do I get from the standing to the sitting? So internal representations refers to what's going on mentally. What are the images, what are the sounds, what are the feelings that I'm generating? Quite unconsciously, who thinks about these things if they're just going to sit in a chair? We just want to sit in the chair. Well, what are all these operations going on inside my brain that are necessary for me to make every single step to achieving that goal? How's that? So NLP is about how we're goal oriented, and what are the computations going on that allow me to achieve that goal.
And so NLP being neuro, which is what's happening in my neurological system, and that doesn't necessarily just mean my brain, because the neurology works through the entire biome that is the human body. Secondly, which is linguistic, so it's neuro-linguistic. So linguistic is what is the language that I'm using internally to do whatever I do. And then programming is, well, most of what we do is a program. It's a structured program learnt over time to become what we do, and whether that is useful to us or not useful to us. So neuro-linguistic programming is that.
Yeah, and we can use the word habit if we want.
Yeah, habit. Yeah.
To replace programming. So, and habits are fantastic things, but we'll probably come to that later. So in terms of your clients and representation systems, there's a whole lot going on. More often than not, quite unconsciously. If they're coming to you as a coach, it means they're not aware of what's going on. They're just aware of the consequences of what they're thinking.
And it's really important to put in at this point that NLP differs from therapy in one respect, that the client can come because they're fine. They just want to do better. So they might be like well, in New Zealand, a good example would be, we're obsessed with sport, not me personally, but we're obsessed with rugby and cricket and soccer and all these different things. And so, every All Black has a psychologist which is trying to work out how they can better organise their thinking in order to get better at thinking about what they're doing. Or in some cases, being in a highly appropriate state of mind and body for playing a game of, well, it's quite an aggressive game of warrior-like behaviour called rugby. So once again, NLP differs on that level because we're not using therapy models as such, even though a lot of NLP was based primarily on watching very effective and influential therapists back in the 60s and 70s and still possibly even now. But working out what did they do so well that could then be utilised as models for consistently helping people to do well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So neuro-linguistic programming, in a nutshell, is how can we improve our game.
Yeah.
This is the fun part about discovering, learning about how we function. And it's often said we're not born with a manual for our brain. We're not born for a manual for how the whole organism works. We are born with an ability to learn and model. So we pick up a whole lot of things from the people around us. We don't necessarily pick up tools or strategies for observing what we're doing and improving what we're doing. So if we do hit sort of a roadblock in our own thinking or our own behaviour, what do you do?
We don't know what to do mostly. So it's kind of like the travesty of my upbringing and my schooling was I was never taught how to use my brain functionally. I was taught how to feed shit in, technical term, and hopefully to be able to regurgitate that well enough so that I could then go to the next level of apparent intelligence, never actually learning what intelligence actually is. And it's not that. It's how to use that. That use the brain or the body or whatever is, and that's not the same as absorbing and regurgitating. Over time, I think most healthy brains can learn probably just about anything to a point of proficiency.
Yes.
And still not understand anything about how that's happened.
Yes.
Yeah. And yet when we understand how that's happened, then we can actually possibly improve the learning process and also distinguish what is useful and what isn't and structurally reorganize that stuff.
Yes. Well, this is our aim as coaches with the people we work with, is, and there's many ways to do this, essentially if we can get them into a state of mind, if we can invite them into a state of mind not unlike a mobile pre-verbal child, they're in an extremely effective learning state to learn something that will take them forward if they're stuck, or to learn something that will improve what they're doing well already.
And I think that comes back to the original mission or premise of NLP, which was an attitude of curiosity leading to a string of techniques. And with a child, a pre-verbal child learning how to walk, for example, or say mum or dad or something, is that there's that novelty aspect. So it's like, the curiosity, like that, well, what's that? And immediately leads to the brain going bink and creating a whole bunch of new neural pathways.
Yes.
It's that novelty numinosum neurogenesis sort of thing that that maybe Dr. Ernest Rossi talks about. But yeah, so it's that, and a lot of NLP is actually helping a person to become more curious about their own capacity to learn.
It's all about difference. A child will naturally seek out difference.
Mm.
And it's fascinating as we get older, for whatever reasons, whatever influences from family or society, the communities we live in, we can be encouraged to not so much fear, but be wary of difference, because we'd rather the familiar. And when you start with familiar, you enter that difference again.
Yeah, and I think a really good example of that would be racism, for example. So if someone is, that's a potentially a fear of difference.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
And same religious, what would you call it if you don't like someone else's religion? I guess that would be this, but that's a fear or potential fear of someone else's difference. Whereas from a NLP perspective, it would be like, well, that's interesting. How do you do that? Like, how do you go about believing that? Or how do you go about...
It's to something else, yes.
Yeah. And it's the same with how do you go about thinking that about that person's colour? How do you go? And the interesting thing there is that a lot of it, it's like political belief, actually, I think. Actually, most of these things is it's actually more often than not, it's just a learned behaviour. That saying, give me a boy before 7 and I'll give you the man, is that just that constant repetition of living in the context of a certain religion, a certain political structure, a certain kind of, let's say, white middle class privilege. So you have a certain perception just mirrored back to you constantly, and so that becomes the filter, which is a technical term we use in NLP, I guess, a filter for how we see the world. And so if you are wearing pink sunglasses all the time, or grey sunglasses all the time. I often wonder about Bono. It's like, man, that guy's always wearing glasses. Like, how does he see the world? What's it like when he takes those things off? Well, I mean, there is an aspect of that. Already we can only see, an incredibly small part of the visual spectrum. So if we wear glasses, we are, but certainly coloured glasses, we are minimising that even further. It's really fascinating. And so, on that analogy, often a coaching perspective would be if someone has a belief that isn't working for them or whatever, it's very much the same analogy. There's a certain sort of filtering system they've been wearing all of their life, which is now no longer useful.
Yeah. And the function of a filter is to allow certain information through and to stop other information.
Yeah.
So a good example is, a strainer. You can put a whole bunch of dirt in there. Some will get through and some will be stopped, held in the strainer. So the bits that can get through, in terms of our own perceptions like sight, sound and hearing, a little bit comes through, but how much doesn't come through? How much we're missing out on. So a belief or an idea about ourselves or the world can stop information from becoming available to us that might actually make a difference in our lives.
The challenge is, I remember as a young man being called by an ex's mother. I was 16, I think, 17. I was called amoral. And it was because I had always had an openness to considering different options of perception. So it was always like, well, if someone believed that or believed that or believed that, it wasn't that I was going, well, you can't. It was more like, well, that's interesting. Like, that's an interesting way of thinking about things. But to a world that is becoming even more kind of constricted, by social media or whatever, even ironically. But ironically, you can really fully just make sure you only meet people that have similar interests, or you can, bubble searching in Google, make sure that you only usually get back the kind of search responses that fit with your past history of searching. So you're becoming more and more focused. So your latitude for consideration, or your scope, is becoming it's just less and less available.
Yes, which is the complete opposite of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP as we're calling it. We want to expand the solution space. We want to expand the experience space.
Choices.
Yeah.
Giving more choices.
Expanding the sense of freedom. What we allow ourselves to do. And allowing difference to make a difference in our lives. Rather, as opposed to what you're talking about, narrowing the choices available to us.
Yeah. And what we're knowing now through just an exponential increase in research into the brain and in the body, in a good sense and maybe not such a good sense, is that we are learning that the less latitude that we have mentally and emotionally, the more likely we are to get ill.
Yes.
So if we have extremely tight beliefs about the way life should be, then we are very much prone to trauma, to stress, because we don't have the flexibility or adaptability to deal with change. And if change suddenly happens, we don't have much internal choice about how to organise our internal representations about what we're experiencing on the outside. And so the internal representation is that: how do we see, how do we feel, how do we hear, and how do we converse internally with ourselves about whatever's going on, outside and inside.
They can be in the moment, and they can also be this unconscious habit. Basically, these representations outside of conscious awareness that motivate most of our behaviour. And we need that. We need habits. We need these programs. Otherwise, we're learning everything every second of every day. So we need learning, and that learning is what we call unconscious. It's very useful. Imagine learning how to brush your teeth for the first time every time you did it. But we don't have to. Once we learn, that's a program that's running. We don't have to relearn that. So some habits are really good. Some habits keep us stuck and stop us from learning something new. So NLP is our way of how can we once again relearn how to learn and continue to add to our experience. Yep. So it's continuous improvement, continuous fascination, continuous curiosity about what's available to us, the opportunities that are available. They're always there, but our perceptions might miss them.
Yeah.
And certainly in my experience, miss them quite a bit.
Yeah, and ditto. We both reflect. I mean, for the viewer / listener, Keith and I have been talking with each other for now on maybe 12 years and maybe 13 years. I contacted Keith because Keith wrote a book a long time ago. What was that first book? Something about children or kids.
It's called Neuro-Linguistic Programming Liberating Parents.
It was, Liberating Parents from the Tyranny of Should was actually the first book.
The first one,
that was a brilliant book. You can't get it now, but it was on lulu.com. Lulu.com, just search engine in there, Keith Gilbert. He's written about 500 books, and they're all brilliant. And they all have a thematic similarity, but different stories or ways of thinking about the same thing. The most recent one being Pearl, which is about an alien, which is a fantastic book. Little plug there for you, mate. And cheap as chips to buy and download immediately, but no plugs here. But fundamentally, I mean, what it comes down to is I contacted Keith because I was looking up Because I was thinking, because our daughter's now 14, and when she was, we were living on Waiheke Island, I think, when it happened, and I was thinking, my God, what do we do about communicating with this child? Because there was a sense, what it was, I was in Mitre 10, which is similar to Australian Bunnings or whatever it might be, and whatever, but it's a hardware store, and I was in this hardware store with my daughter Phoebe, and she was like a tot. She was like 2, maybe 2.5, and she was carrying this gorgeous little fluffy flower thing, and she was just absolutely gorgeous age, and everything's just, oh wow, what's over there? And she dropped this flower. I didn't notice, she didn't notice, we keep walking on, and suddenly we get, excuse me, and the high-vis guy that none of us knew, but was a Mitre 10 high-vis guy. High-vis, orange thing that they wear. They have to wear health and safety in these places. And he's obviously an employee. Anyway, so he walks up and says, I think you dropped this. So he didn't introduce himself. He just said, I think you dropped this. And Phoebe recognizes it, grabs it, and he goes, oh, good girl. And I just spun out. Because from a neuro-linguistic perspective, it didn't make sense. Let me explain. So I'm going, wait a minute, so you got our attention, we turned around, you gave something that belongs to her without introducing yourself, without getting down to her level, you didn't build rapport, and then you hand it, but she recognizes, she takes it, all normal. And you say, good girl. How is she suddenly a good girl because she took something back from a complete stranger who didn't build rapport, who she doesn't know who? So she's suddenly got this network in her brain that if I take something that I think is mine from a stranger, I'm a good girl. That me. And so and for days I'm running this junk in my head, trying, what is wrong with this conversation? Because it just inherently felt, this is not right. She's not a good girl. She did something which technically is potentially unsafe for her going forward. But good girl. And so anyway, I was already doing searching on the web, and I came up with your book. I read it, and I read it again and again and again, because it had dialogues in it about how to have a conversation with your child, and it gave examples and stuff like this. And I immediately got in touch with you, I think. This is a long time ago, and we started talking. Very, very, sometimes we wouldn't talk for like 6 months, I don't think it was, but it was like very, because we're both busy. But that's how it started. But it all came back to that, for me, I'm coming back to it, I guess, an internal representation of what I expected to be a more healthy way of communicating with a child. But I didn't know, because there was just no literature on it, I didn't know how to kind of frame all of that. I didn't know how to kind of already doing NLP, had been doing it for I think maybe 5, 6, 7 years by that time. But I didn't have the language, I didn't actually know. And then you came up and you started blah, 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 blah. And then you brought in things like this thing called the double bind and schizophrenic language, which we'll talk about at some point, and all this sort of stuff. And I'm going, BAM! It's just blew my head. But fundamentally, the essence of it was the way that culture influences our internal way of reflecting upon ourselves, and if we constantly get the feedback that that's okay or that's right, then we feel more and more secure in that way of communicating, even when it's totally ineffective, actually. Like it's totally dissociates us from who we really are, what we really need, how to fully, to actually, as you said in one book, self-esteem for teenagers, I think it was, or something like that. You know, how to have true self-esteem, self-awareness, that sort of stuff. I'm going on, but that's how this conversation, which has been an ongoing conversation for God knows 12, 13 years, has been going. There you go, viewer. There's the history of the Keith and Aaron show.
We have to plug your sleep book. So.
No, we don't, because we're not talking about sleep. Moving on. No, we don't have to make a plug for that at all. We don't have to make any plugs for that at all. And maybe we just turn down. Oh, it's the age of the internet, isn't it? Everyone's just so in it for themselves. I mean, we really want this to be for everyone else. But wait a minute, let me get my book. Yeah.
Wow, where do we go from there? Well, that's...
Humour. I mean, it's humour. It's like, this is really... Sorry, I'm interrupting, but I went to a market this morning with my wife, Wendy, and had a coffee. And I'm off coffee, but I had one anyway because I knew this was coming up. And so there's been a little bit of blah, blah, and so you have to forget. But you know, once again, it's all about the internal representation stuff. How do we internalize things, and then what do we decide to do with that? And for us, you and I, we've decided that actually, do a podcast, write books, give talks and workshops and that sort of stuff. And I mean, we find that is, and see clients, those who are courageous enough to sit down with us and endure the insanity of self-awareness.
Let's give them a small applause that they are courageous to say there's something's got to change.
Yeah.
I want things to be better.
Yeah.
So who can help? So,
and on to add to that, the courage of recognizing that they have to deal with something that is completely and utterly intangible. It's not like they're going to see a chiropractor to get their back put in, or going to a shoe shop to get insoles stuck into their shoes so to get rid of their sore knees or whatever. They actually do something that no one really understands. I mean, you read some psychology at the moment. Psychologists don't understand what's going on. Psychiatrists just, and I'm generalizing, but there's a lot of psychiatry which, seriously, cognitive behavioral therapy, seriously, there's, aspects of that are really cool, but fundamentally it's like, really? You're still doing that? You're still writing papers on that? Really? And all that is, from me as perspective, it's like, and that's a judgmental perspective, which I'm fully owning, and it's like, well, it's not good, but what, and so what can I learn from? What is my discomfort about what they're doing?
Yes. Discomfort.
Yeah. And this is a really important thing about NLP, because one of the other aspects of NLP is, in Australia you have Neighbours, in New Zealand you have Shortland Street, and the thing about Coronation Street, Neighbours, Shortland Street, whatever culture you're in, there's always one, is that there will be this ongoing circular same shit, different day. Same shit, different day. New characters, same shit, different day. And they look great while they're traumatizing each other with this one fundamental essence of it is that my problem is because of what they did to me.
Yes.
Whether they know they've done it to me or whether they're just a bitch and they've done that to me. Or bastard, and they've done that to me. And so NLP says, wait a minute, what is your honest, true feeling about what you think about what they've just done? And the example of that is, you line 20 people up to watch a car, and 20 people lined up watching a car crash. Weird scenario. But you interview 20 people who've seen the same car crash, you'll have 20 completely different representations of that. And they're all experiencing the same thing, but they're having a completely different internal experience of that very same thing. And many of them will go, that made me feel. So in NLP, that's not what we call being at cause, if for want of a better word, or responsible for your own experience relating to that thing. It also means that we're a victim of what just happened, which means we can't change how we feel until that changes. Now, we all know a car crash isn't going to change.
Yes.
Yeah, it's always just going to be so horrible. It's just always going to be that way. Well, yes, it will be if you choose to have that internal representation of what just happened and where you are in that.
Yeah, it's the same as I'm standing, the chair is over there. What gets me from here to there? I have to represent every step of motion to get there. And in the same way, if we're representing a trauma, if we're representing a future situation that concerns us, if we're representing something that happened in the past, these are all ongoing movements, if you will, and thoughts that motivate our behaviour. So whether it's a goal that's desirable when I sit in the chair, or it's just a habit of representing something that happened in the past, or representing something that I don't like about what might happen in the future. If we don't know that they're happening at the unconscious level, all we're aware of is perhaps a sensation, whether it be pleasant or unpleasant, and we're going, oh no, what's doing this to me?
Yes, and that's a really important thing, because when you work...
This emotion must be happening to me.
Yes, it's happening to me, and because I can't see the list of structural aspects that lead to the feeling, then I just think, oh my gosh, I'm anxious. And anxiety is a really good example, because it's so deeply embedded into the structure of our self-preservation programming. And yet, having worked, with hundreds of people who are doing anxiety really well, which is how we're going to talk about these things. It's like when you're doing anxiety, you're not having it. You're doing it, and yet you're not at fault. It's just that you're doing something that at some point had to be done because it was perceived it would save you, or it would protect you, or it would keep you from harm, or however you want to frame it. But then it becomes
So for our viewers, we would classify or label anxiety as something really useful.
Yes. Yeah.
Its initial experience is really useful. More often than not, anxiety is a sense of I'm not prepared for something that's going to happen. If anxiety continues and is amplified over and over, that's when people start to think, oh, this is happening to me, this is a problem. But its initial experience is an extremely useful communication from the unconscious, because the unconscious is exploring all these possibilities of what might happen. What if some of those possibilities are unpleasant? Anxiety is this fantastic signal saying, are you prepared? Somehow it's being demonized. You're not supposed to feel anxiety because it feels bad. Of course it's a bad feeling. But if you knew its structure, if you knew its intent, you would go, thank you. I haven't put my shoes on and it is raining outside. Silly example. But it's about preparation. Rather than, so instead of saying, well, we've got to get rid of anxiety, you and I, in the field of NLP, would say, no, we don't want to get rid of anxiety. We want to know what it's telling us, so then we can move forward effectively.
And sometimes what can help someone who's been doing anxiety for long enough, sometimes just having that conversation alone can help that person realize that there's nothing broken about what's happening.
Well, people who experience anxiety are working quite well. Thank you very much.
Yeah. But it's often our internal representation of the thing that we're experiencing that because we will have like an internal representation that is not useful for anxiety would be, oh my gosh, what is this thing? I'm going to die. Or oh my gosh, I can't breathe. I'm going to die. Or, it's usually, it's that flight or fight thing. I'm going to die. Or I've got to get out of here. And so, but if we understand that it's a natural response to a potential future possibility, then the internal representation would say, well, okay, well, what is that future potential thing? Okay, well, I've got an exam in 3 days. Okay, so when I think about that exam, how am I thinking about it? Well, I'm imagining being in the chair, freaking out because I can't answer the question and I've got 5 seconds to go. And I'm only at question 1.
And if I fail this...
Oh, I'm going to die. And what will my parents think because I'm a failure? All that sort of stuff. And so...
there are many aspects to it, and one of the fascinating things is pre-verbal children experience mistakes as failure as an intrinsic part of learning. It's not frustration. Yeah, sure, they'll be frustrated, but it won't stop them. They just discover what doesn't work, and they keep doing whatever they need to do to find out what does work. We adults have learned that failure is a bad thing, that making mistakes is a bad thing, which is in complete contrast to young children. They just know that it's not that way. It might be another way. I'll try another way. Well, if it's not that, I'll try another way. We won't even go there now. If failure and mistakes internally for us cause really unpleasant sensations, we will not endeavour to make the appropriate mistakes to find out what doesn't work, so we can find out what does work. So does anxiety, go back to your description, if someone's experiencing anxiety, go back to your own. You mentioned your breathing.
Yeah.
So it's an emotional experience, and what does that do to our physiology? How do we actually experience that anxiety? Does it affect our breathing? It does. Does it affect how our musculature, the tonus? Are we clenched? Are we? So if we're not breathing properly, if we're in a clenched posture, does this assist effective thinking about that potential future?
Yeah.
So does it shut down thinking? Does it shut down the ability to come up with solutions? So the ability to come up with better ways of perceiving what's going to happen, or in the case of anxiety, solutions to prepare for those potential futures. Yeah. If we're doing anxiety, can we think of better ways? No. Anxiety is the signal that's asking us, if you're in a better state of mind, you come up with solutions. Because in anxiety, you're not going to come up with solutions.
Which is a really good thing about what we often do in NLP is that we'd often ask a question, when do you notice that you're not feeling anxious? And so what we'd be doing there is finding their internal model for feeling safe or feeling inspired or feeling curious or feeling energized or feeling secure, whatever it might be. And finding out how they do that. And then we could then say, well, take that feeling and imagine you're going back in time to a time where you were anxious, and you take this feeling to that. Can you do anxiety the same way? And they'll go, 99% of the time they'll go, well, no. Because the thing is about anxiety is you can't do it about anything that happened in the past, because that's anxiety is about the future. So so if the person takes that positive feeling into a time where they used to feel anxious, they're rewiring the circuitry immediately around that past anxious moment.
Yes.
And because that past anxious moment has the same wiring as probably most of their past anxious moments, by rewiring that one, they're actually rewiring all of those
All
past,
segregation.
yeah. And so, and if they do that enough, then it's very difficult to run the same wiring into the future.
Well, if you have an option then.
Yeah, so you can do anxiety if you want, but now you have a choice. Wait a minute, do I have to? And the essence of NLP on that level is adding choices to how we do whatever we're going to do in the moment. Yeah.
So, if I can go back to, you mentioned my curiosity bit. Well, I wrote the book that I wrote in response to we were going to bring a child into the world, and I freaked out. At the time, I was still exploring my own habits. I was wanting to make big differences in my life because I realized how many habits in my life were constraints. My life was not as enjoyable as I wanted it to be. It was very unpleasant in many aspects of my life. So I wanted to make a difference, and hence I found NLP. And during my training, and the fact that this child was coming into our lives, it hit me, if I don't fix myself, that's a better word, that's required. If I don't improve my life,
Make some adjustments, Keith.
that's right. If I don't improve the way I'm doing life, and I bring this child into the world, how am I going to influence this child? And as I wrote in the book, we give what we have. And I'm thinking, well, what do I have to give? If I've just got negativity, if I've just got a sense of no hope, if I have a sense of I'll never make it, I'll never succeed, well, how could I possibly encourage a child to think differently to the way I'm thinking? It'd be completely incongruent for me to have all these ideas, let's call them negative. It'd be completely incongruent and almost impossible to relate to a child in such a way that would encourage him or her to create their own life and create their own choices. So I thought I wanted to make the changes in myself, and hence the book resulted, which is really an exploration of my own thinking and discovering my own habits. And wondering, well, if I am going to communicate with a child, will I be communicating in a congruent manner? So, just wanted to throw that in because I think it's fascinating. As coaches, when we have someone coming to us, are we exemplars? Are we paragons of people incorporating NLP and actually demonstrating that we use this stuff? We apply it to ourselves to create more choice for ourselves, rather than, oh no, we're just coaches and therapists working on other people. Actually, we use this stuff in ourselves, and we work with each other to expand our own solution spaces. So I hope that's useful.
Oh, it's very useful and really honest. And I think, the challenge, I think, with coaching is sometimes the feelings of incongruence and the feelings of, possibly I've had some coaches and even myself say, sometimes I feel like a fraud because I'm, supposed to be, as you say, a paragon of self-awareness or some, whereas, human being doing human stuff, basically a big ball of out-of-control programming at the best of times, with a few extra tools, in our toolkit, and no different to a builder or a home handyman. Builder stands next to a home handyman looking at the same project, and really sometimes the coach might be the qualified builder, but the other person that's coming for coaching has, a bit of knowledge. And nowadays you can go on Google and just Google just about anything and get WebMD or whatever will tell you, well, what you can do, and you can watch an NLP session online, if you want to, if you can be bothered, and same for hypnosis or whatever. But so people have knowledge, but they don't necessarily know how to utilize it structurally in order to do what needs to be done. And that's why we work together and have done for years, is because there's only so much you can do on your own. There's only so much you can actually, I can go inside and, look at the way I'm interpreting my world. And yet it's very difficult from first person to restructure how I'm interpreting my world, and also to filter out the way I'm interpreting my world in order to get a different look on how I'm interpreting my world, so I can change how I interpret my world. It's a circular process. And it's and it's why sometimes, I think Edward de Bono used to, actually Mike Hutchinson's from Saatchi and Saatchi. I remember I was part of a speaker thing years ago. I think it was New Zealand Speakers or something, and we'd meet once a month and have breakfast, blah blah blah. And Mike Hutchinson is one of the originators or creators of Saatchi and Saatchi in New Zealand, which most people know Saatchi and Saatchi because it's highly influential in advertising, and so many of the things that we saw over the last 20 years, advertising, whatever, came from Saatchi and Saatchi. So much innovation and that sort of stuff. And he often talked about, I've lost my track. That was interesting. Just trying to, what were we talking about?
Circular thinking.
Yeah, circular thinking. Oh, and that was that thing where he would say that often what they did for I can't remember, it was L'Oreal or something they did in the States, is they created what was called the Hive. And it was a massive warehouse, and they brought like maybe 20, 30, 40 people in from just the most random parts of life. So they actually had an African drummer. They had they had a couple of accountants. They had all these people to work on, and the premise was L'Oreal is putting out this whole new product line, and it's got to be a completely unique advertising campaign. And so for every one person, I believe this is how it went, because this is the time when they didn't have high definition everything and blah blah blah. They had 2 people watching and recording everything that each person did and said and whatever. But it was nuts for like a weekend or a week, or something. I can't remember exactly. But he was telling me the story, and at the end, L'Oreal had what is known as one of the most influential product launches ever known up till that time, because it was just so loopy. Things came out of such left field that no one had ever thought about, because someone's drumming and maybe smoking a bit of weed in the corner or something like this. But an accountant's, well, the numbers don't stack up, but if you added 4, that'd be great. It's like, there'd be a psychologist there and some person who's, drawing pictures, random. But what happened, and I think that's that thing with NLP, is that often it's never obvious, it's never clear, it's never certain, and there's always that aspect of, well, what if this, or what if that, or, do you know what I mean? Did I lose track there again for a moment? I think I did.
Well, for our viewers, you and I work with each other quite often, and the number of times, I know these tools, I've known NLP for a long time, the number of times I've been surprised that I've been stuck, and I call you up. The fascinating thing about that is I've got my perspective, and as soon as I incorporate your perspective, or have available to me your perspective, things can loosen up, and solutions can come to me. I recall it was early last year, I was in a very, very poor state, couldn't find solutions to what I was going through, called you, we did one session, you helped me out with one session. The next day, I saw in its completion a book that I've been wanting to write for over 17 years. So how's that? So
Hold it up again. Come on, Keith. Hold it up again.
this is not a plug, but
Lulu.com, Pearl. Perl.
the point of it is I was stuck in a way of experiencing things. Even though I know these tools called NLP, and I was doing a whole lot of stuff on myself, and I wasn't getting anywhere. I wasn't progressing. I was frustrated, like you wouldn't believe. So yeah, I called you up, and because you could guide me, and I didn't have to be the guide. Because you can guide me, I could immerse myself in the experience of being guided. And you could access my unconscious in a way that I was only at the one perspective. I was in a loop. And you're outside of that loop and able to influence me in such a way that solutions emerged from my unconscious, where I was probably, with all the best of intentions, keeping myself on a loop. My frustration was getting greater and greater. So, as much as we can do stuff for ourselves, the systemic nature of human existence, the fact that we're influenced from all aspects, from the world itself, from individuals, there's a whole lot of information there that is useful to us if we're open to it. So NLP, let's think about NLP. It's two people communicating. The difference between two people communicating with NLP and say any other two people communicating with NLP, we have some precision in recognizing patterns within language, in recognizing patterns within body movement, in recognizing patterns within eye movement. All of these suggesting that we're thinking a certain way. Because of the thinking, behavior emerges. All behavior is motivated by thought. So with some precision, we can influence people to expand the range of choices they thought they had. Whereas a random meeting of two people, without that precision, we tend to impose what we think on the other person. If they have, whether it be a concern or a particular goal they have in mind. And let's face it, it all boils down to goals. Even if you're experiencing something unpleasant, your goal is to get out of it. So it's goal oriented. But if it's random, and without precision, we tend to go, well, what I think you should do is this. Whereas NLP, we don't tell people what to think at all. We explore how they're doing what they're thinking, and we invite them into very resourceful states of mind from which emerge more choice. How's that? What's your take?
Yeah, I agree. I was just reflecting upon. I'm just going to close this curtain. Upon a situation recently where, a client said, "Well, what would you do?" And no, that doesn't work. So it's like.
Yes. What would you do?
Yeah. What would you do though? Well, if I knew what I was going to do, why would I be here? And which is a really valid question. And so, well, my question would be, well, when have you made a decision that worked really well for you? Oh yeah, I did this, and it worked really well because I felt this, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So if you brought that feeling to this situation, what changes straight away? Oh, not as concerned about it as I was. Okay, so when you're not as concerned about it as you were moments ago, what does that give you now that you didn't have moments ago? Oh, I don't know, I kind of just feel more, I don't know if I give as much of a shit. Okay, so if you don't give as much as a shit, how does the future look for you right now? And they go, oh, somehow brighter. I don't know, that doesn't make any sense. So all of that, but there's a literal conversation that, that we've had with each other and also with our clients is like, well, none of that made any sense. But fundamentally, to the internal representations and to the unconscious, which drives most of our behaviour, that makes perfect sense. And this is, the unconscious mind is something that really needs to be understood here, is that, fundamentally all learning is unconscious. When you got your balance on a bicycle for the first time, you didn't log that in, okay, well, I just bloody got that, okay, now that's logged in, so I can do that now. No. It was like an immediate moment where you suddenly get your balance. You have an unconscious sense of what that is, what that means, what that feels like. There's a whole, but it's all happens in this biome, this intelligent biome called the unconscious system. And then, after that you can't fall off. And so when we say that we have when working with people in coaching situation, we're working unconsciously with them, what that can often mean more than anything is we're just asking questions which help that person to connect with a more unconscious awareness of what they're doing. A habit's a really good time. So smoking. So if someone comes along and says, I want to give up smoking. So once we've got around some other questions that we'd probably ask first around outcomes and things like that to make sure that they actually do want to stop, what we then say is, well, how do you know it's time to have a smoke? For example, if you're doing hypnosis and the person just wants to be fixed, you'll just help them to relax and you'll, give them a relaxing conversation which helps them to stop. But if they want to do NLP, or if you do both, you might start with the NLP, which is, so how do you know it's time to have a cigarette? And they'll go, oh, well, and so what we'll notice is they're going to visual recall, which is up there, and we'll go, so what kind of context would it normally be in? Oh, well, it's usually when I'm whatever. See, they don't necessarily think about that before they have a cigarette. They just go, no, time for a ciggy. But most people actually unconsciously have a mental image of two fingers in front of them with a cigarette in it. And that image is kind of a movie, the smoke's rising, it's real life, it's right there, they're associated into their body, and that's how they get a 10 out of 10 awareness that they need to have a smoke. But they're not even remotely conscious that that's... Because most people's first experience of this is horrific. It's horrific. It's a horrible, disgusting, but the nicotine kicks in. But that image is profoundly logged in, unconsciously.
Yeah. Which can be triggered by the lunchtime bell, it can be triggered by...
A million triggers.
Where the sun is at the time, where it could be triggered by the smell of coffee, it can be triggered by...
A beer?
Saying, yeah, a beer. It can be triggered by someone saying, do you want to have a chat outside? All these triggers, and all of a sudden, all these representations, there's the cigarette in the fingers, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, the client you mentioned, when you asked, what was it like when you actually made a good decision about something, and you're inviting that person into a resourceful state of mind, which is clearly different to the state of mind they're in as they bring this concern to you as a coach. So they've got the state of mind that's perpetuating the concern.
Yeah.
A very simple, gentle maneuver. What was it like when you made a really good decision? Invites them into a different experience. Oh, I made a really good decision when I blah blah, and they're in a different state of mind. So straight away you have expanded the solution space. Here's two options. You can be concerned in the way you were when you first arrived. You can be in a state of mind when you made a really good decision. So when you explore all these two, which one allows you to perceive the concern in a different way, or in a more effective manner?
And the interesting thing that we are learning from research is that the more there's a saying from neurology, which is neurons that play together or stay together, or there's this element that the more we do one thing, what we do is we become expert at that one thing, whether that one thing is a really bad habit or a really good habit. The brain doesn't go, oh no, we shouldn't do that. It goes, oh yeah, let's do that, because it's like, wow, that's cool. And so even if it's a novel experience, it could be a really bad novel experience, bad as in self-destructive or whatever, but the unconscious goes, well, that's cool. Let's try that again and see if we can get the same feedback, And so it's not going to judge, and then you've got a habit, good or bad. The thing that we're learning through research is that if we talk about the problem enough, a good example might be, and where the research has been done, is more around traumatic experience. So if someone has a trauma and then they go and see someone and then they talk about it, and then they go and see another person and they talk about it, and then every time they talk about it, this fascinates me, is that not only do they expand on the size or the neurological connections to that past experience, they bring the present neurological experience to that past experience. So they're literally building more neurological structure around that past traumatic experience. So unless they have an epiphany, which allows them to jump out and see it from a different perspective, from third person or second person, whatever you might call it, they will just continue building the structure of that negative experience, and that will become the way their world is seen, through that structured negative experience. And a really good analogy was from a neurologist, which I heard, which is if you're going skiing, you have this beautiful, you have a trail on new snow, and having been skiing, worked on a mountain for a year, it was like half a year, it was like, it's like this, so you get the new snow in the morning, you go to the top and you go down. But what will happen is there's certain runs that get really well worn. And so what happens is you'll get into a run yourself that you like, but you'll notice that there's like ski paths, and you're suddenly in that ski path. But what will happen by the end of the day, and even by the end of the week if it hasn't snowed again, that path will become so well worn that you'll just be in it, and you can't get out of it. So even by your own, can't even get, like I've fallen onto my head in past because I couldn't get out of that rut.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's a great analogy. So not until the new snow falls, not until there's beautiful new fresh snow, so it could be a new perception of reality, or it could be a new conversation, or it could be like someone comes in with a whole different reframe of your experience. Are you able to maybe get out of that rut?
Yes.
The rut is like so well worn and it's so comfortable because it's going to get you to where you need to go, which is the bottom. There's a pretty good view on the way, blah, blah, blah. But if you want to get out of it, it's really hard because it's.
Yeah.
I think that's a great analogy. And
Yes. Well, the lovely thing, I'm sure you enjoy this as well. The lovely thing about NLP, we don't talk about the problem.
well, we don't have to.
We don't have to.
I mean, some people really want to.
We certainly allow it. We certainly allow it. If you use the rut analogy, people will talk about it because they've been trained to talk about it in many instances. We've got to keep on talking about this, and suddenly you'll be out of it. Or eventually you'll be out of it if you keep on talking about it. That's one school of thought, and that's fine. And I've had many clients who have been to therapists and talked about their problems for years. And they learn to get a kick out of it.
Well, I think we have to be very careful for the listener. The kick has to be defined, because some people say, "Oh no, that's not fair on that person." And on one level, I agree. What we mean by kick is there is a natural thing, an endorphin or a dopamine occurrence that occurs hormonally in the brain every time we get a familiar feedback. So it can be like playing, your computer game where it's, swipe right, or you got your Instagrams or shit like that. Every time you swipe down and it reloads, you go, oh, like that. You get a little dopamine kick because it's familiar, but you don't know what you're going to get. Wow, that's cool. So you think you're getting creative feedback, but you're not. It's exactly the same thing every single time, but the brain goes, oh. So the kick is not a fault or personality negativity. It's just a hormone. Is that, yeah?
Absolutely. It's when they go to the therapist week after week or month after month, they get something that feels quite good because they're listened to. Here's an environment that might be incredibly unique and different to their day-to-day lives. They feel they're listened to. They feel they can open up. They can talk because they can't do this anywhere else. And that becomes it's a very pleasant sensation. It brings up very pleasant sensations. It's a nice thing to do. That's all. That's great. If you're continually talking about the problem for month after month, year after year, that's okay. But what if you want that problem to be history? If you've been talking about it for month after month, if you've been talking about it for years, you're still talking about it. That means it's still present. So the question to our viewers and listeners, would you rather the problem be in the past, or would you rather new stuff in your future? So with NLP, obviously we allow people to tell their story, but we also frame it in the beginning. You can tell your story, but we also want to do some stuff to have that in the past and to increase your range of choices. And
that conversation, I'll give an example. I mean, many years ago, we were moving from Hawke's Bay in North Island down to here, Christchurch, 4.5 years ago. And 3 or 4 days before we moved, I had a phone call from someone who said that this young girl had to see me because she had the most horrific experience. And detail is not necessary. And she came along, and it was fascinating because her mother told me what had happened. And I said, as she was getting into it, it was so horrible that, our own mind starts making the picture. And I said, I don't want to hear any more. What's happening for her? So what's happening for her was some remarkable psychosomatic stuff, just utterly, like to the point where she couldn't see colour anymore. It was so profound. So she finally, and this is the day before I was moving, so Wendy and my daughter had already gone to Christchurch, the movers had already, so I was there on my own, like just sweeping, cleaning up. It's quite full on. But, and this young girl turned up, and she looked at me, and she was so traumatized. And I said to her, I don't need to hear what happened, because she had to tell so many, even she had to tell the police, it was just horrific. And I said, but what I need you know what happened. She goes, no, she couldn't speak. And I said, and when you remember it, you're remembering it in a specific way. And she was going like this. And so I managed to get her to speak a little bit, and we found out how she was remembering it. And we didn't even get into outcome or anything, because normally you go into outcome, what is it you want? Seriously, I think that's obvious. So there's a point where you have to kind of bypass some of the formality stuff, the clinical stuff, which is, this person couldn't speak properly, all of 14 or 13 or something, and so what happened was the whole thing was being remembered in colour, which we found out, and we scaled it out of 10, and it was 12. Yeah. So I said to her, would it stay at 12 if it was in black and white? And it immediately went to 5. So for the listener, it's really important, or the viewer, it's really important to understand that this was something that, this is really relevant for people who have been through really difficult stuff. And for some people also who just find it very difficult to talk about what's happened in general.
Yeah.
And what we've realised in NLP, or certainly, is that it's what happened, and this can sometimes sound so uncaring or not very compassionate, is that what happened isn't actually as important as, in this situation, as how am I remembering it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if it's history, it's not happening right now. If I'm having a really unpleasant experience right now, isn't that curious? Because it's not happening right now.
No, it's not happening. Yeah.
So the fascinating thing about something like trauma, we have to represent it, re-present.
Yeah. Over and over and over and over.
Exactly, over and over.
Yeah.
We have to do something internally that brings that historical moment here, so that we can experience all of those unpleasant things, if not in an amplified manner, which makes it even worse. We have to bring them into the present. And that's the fascinating thing. It happened. How are we doing it now? It's the how. If you can change any aspects of the how, your experience will change.
Well, and that was her experience. So as soon as it went from colour to black and white, her shoulders dropped, everything relaxed, and it was an immediate. And I said, and if we could push it away just a little bit, just enough. If we could just push it away just enough. And suddenly she was, visually. And she was doing it with her eyes open. Like she was just, fully like, but she was, so unconsciously prepared to go there because she knew whatever it was occurring was not helping her. And she'd come to trust through her whānau, her family, that it was safe to work with me. And at that point, her eyes cleared. Like she went from foggy, and she suddenly went like this. Because she could suddenly see colour again.
Yes.
How ironic.
Yes.
But it had nothing to do with talking about what happened.
Yes.
It had everything to do with how it was held together.
How it was represented.
How it was represented internally.
The visual, the colour.
Yeah.
Where the visual was.
Mm-hmm.
Was she fully associated? Was she experiencing it? If you can push it away, that's a different way of experience.
Yeah, and also what that kind of possibly unconsciously said was to her unconscious mind went, oh, so it can be over there? Oh, wicked. Because here's the thing, and this is, having worked a lot with trauma historically through no real choice, but just that's how people find us sometimes, is, the unconscious doesn't know until it's offered. It doesn't know that it can do that.
Yes.
It knows at some level that it's possible, but it doesn't know it can do that with this thing.
Yes.
Specifically.
Yes.
So it's kind of like, Descartes, a mind once altered by a new idea can never return to its original form. And the unconscious goes, oh, so we can do that. And it goes, whew, that's a relief. And literally the whole body just goes. I've had some people go, can I do that? No shit. They've gone, can I do that? And it's really it blows them away.
Yeah.
And so the answer is yes. So the question a lot of in NLP is how. Whereas a lot of questions in alternative therapy practices is possibly why. And when you're locked into for example, a traumatic or phobic or whatever, why is a ludicrous scenario, and it has a perception of blame. Whereas how brings us back to the structure, and you have to access a very different unconscious part of the operating system in order to get the answer for that. And it frees us up from blame.
also goes into justification, reasons, which doesn't help you get out of.
I mean, it's classic, isn't it? I mean, what we go through life going, oh, why did I do that? What would be more useful is, okay, so in this moment, how am I remembering this in such a way that keeps me feeling shitty about it? Technical term. And so I would remember it, usually I'd associate into the remembering, so I'm in my body, I'm remembering exactly what happened. So if I go, well, if I saw it through that person's eyes, does it feel exact? No, it doesn't feel the same. If I was a fly on the wall watching this, no, it doesn't feel the same. So immediately we've generated two new ways of representing that past experience. And so as soon as the brain recognises, oh, we can do it that way, it goes, oh, okay, well, we've got more choices about how to feel about it. And that means we have more learning opportunities, more ways of thinking about how do we operate going forward that are useful to us and useful to the other person or context. Now, I'm just aware also that we're at an hour 20. And we, listeners, Keith and I can go on forever. And for the listener...
We'll do it in stages.
But what we're going to do is we're going to do it in stages. So I'm thinking a summary of what we've been talking about that might be a nice wrap-up.
Sure. Let's go back to the definition of NLP. And it can be defined in many different ways. The way I like to think about it is, if we're capable of learning, and we are, if we're capable of entertaining an idea, and we are, ideas motivate our behaviour. If we can learn new ideas, that means we will always be able to have flexibility in our choice of behaviour. So NLP is a way of encouraging ourselves and each other to keep that solution space open and expanding, rather than being fixed in an idea. Whether an idea is anxiety or depression, whether an idea is I'll always be poor, whether an idea is the world's falling apart, and that happens a lot, where a lot of it is imposed on us by other people's fears. So NLP is a way of learning how we work, how we experience the world, the information that's given to us, and how we can create new possibilities from them. How would you like to add to that?
I just think of curiosity. For me, in a role of coaching someone, an attitude of curiosity is paramount. And so if I think about what has been useful to individuals, including myself, having or bringing that attitude to our day-to-day experience gives us more choices.
Yes.
And so I'd redefine the original statement, which was attitude of curiosity leading to, a string of techniques. I would actually say an attitude of curiosity leading to more choices.
More choices.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And when we have more choices, we feel more empowered. We have a sense that we have more relevance, maybe meaning in life. We have more self-determination in life. Whereas what we get a lot from the media is that we don't. What we get a lot from certain theories or climate change, whatever, is that we have very little control outside of using less plastic. But once again, maybe that's a good choice, is to use just less plastic. It makes sense anyway when you see some of the states of... So so it's more choices and curiosity and bringing that to our personal experience, and also recognizing that we're not broken, we're just learning.
Learning, yeah. So we can learn through influences, whether they be family or society. We can learn to actually stop learning. NLP is a way of stimulating that learning. Again, it's a way of accessing, creating states of mind that are superb for learning. With very resourceful states of mind, just like a child who's curious about the world, because it's all new, it's all fascinating. But when does it ever cease to be fascinating? It's always fascinating. Being able to generate those sorts of states of mind allow us to do more, allows the unconscious to create more, and a lot more is available to us, greater flexibility. So, yeah. How's that?
Awesome. If you want to read Keith's books, lulu.com, search for Keith Gilbert, and lulu.com, search for Aaron McLaughlin. There's a couple of books there, I think, still. And we will be coming more to you on this channel, which at this point we haven't yet created, but there'll be more on this channel, and possibly weekly or fortnightly there'll be a new conversation. And the other thing is, if you want to make a
if you want to get in contact with Aaron or myself, we'll have details.
Yeah, deets. And also you can even suggest something you'd like us to have a conversation about. So if you have a question or a challenge, we're more than happy to bring that, and we might even, probably will run it in some way, shape or form while we're talking.
We'll demonstrate it on each other. Yeah. So whatever it is, we can always play the part or recall a time when we actually experienced that.
Yeah, because no doubt it'll be there.
Absolutely. How we will relate to each other to increase our solution spaces.
Very cool.
Increase our resourcefulness.
So till next time, ciao.
Ciao. It's been fun.